first-person shooter was popularized in the 1990s, several titles in the genre have attempted to do one of two things, or both, to capitalize on the kinetic feeling of immersion that comes with experiencing the game world and its going-ons through the eyes of the avatar. A, by empowering the gamer with a wide array of weapons and letting them loose on a virtual space chock full of hostile NPCs, all too happy to riddle their quarry with lead. And B, by dropping the player in an environment that not only puts their navigational skills to the test, but also engrosses them with a tangible atmosphere that can prove inviting or unsettling. It's a two-part formula that has stood the test of time for over 25 years, and it's one that developers have been more than eager to iterate upon in sundry ways. With the advancement of technology, games have built upon the shooter template with more dramatic storylines, customization options, gameplay modes, and an emphasis on human competition. These are design choices that have embellished the template and attracted wider audiences, a development that was especially conspicuous during the last console generation, with works such as Modern Warfare setting trends that define the modern military FPS. Suffice it to say that the arcadey and skill-based roots of the genre were gradually being diluted. For players that solely seek in shooters the raw satisfaction of blasting their virtual foes to pieces with boomsticks, while simultaneously traversing dynamic locales that captivate the senses and keep them on their toes, this sort of philosophy generally came across as a missed opportunity to distill and perfect the two halves of the formula. A few titles did, however, put an extra emphasis on the core FPS blueprint, and fewer still actually came close to perfecting it. And there is one first-person shooter in particular that stands out. One that took advantage of modern technology and did everything it possibly could to make the participant feel both like a true hunter and the hunted one. That FPS was none other than Monolith Productions' F.E.A.R.
Other games have done monsters that jump out of the closet at you, and what we've really tried to do is get under your skin.
It makes no difference. He deserved to die. They all deserve to die.
Originally designed as a futuristic title that took inspiration from Metal Gear, Ghost in the Shell, and Appleseed, F.E.A.R. puts players in the role of the Point Man, an operative of the titular organization who possesses superhuman reflexes. He is charged with containing a paranormal threat in the form of Paxton Fettel, a psychic commander who has the ability to control an entire battalion of clone soldiers known as replicas through telepathy. But a series of unexplained events unfolding around the Avatar suggest that there is more behind the scenes than a telepathic rogue. It's the sort of setup whose paramilitary nature and dreary undertones could have resulted in a schlocky spookfest that failed to capture the tension of its cinematic influences, Hong Kong action flicks and Japanese horror. But F.E.A.R.'s prestigious foundation said otherwise. Monolith always had a knack for fiery shootouts and explosive scenarios. The Blood series and Shogo, Mobile Armor Division, delivered their fair share of over-the-top and bloody action. But with advanced rendering technology at their disposal and lots of gung-fu binging, Monolith had reached their gameplay apex with F.E.A.R. The in-game action looked nothing short of amazing and cinematic, so much so that it felt like the player was starring in their own summer blockbuster flick. Its bullet fests were unlike anything seen in other shooters. Every single piece of shrapnel created by the avatars and NPCs' trigger finger can light up the entire scene in nanoseconds and send particles flying across the environment. This effect is amplified when using bullet time, which slows down everything and turns the point man into an unstoppable gun-toting killing machine. Speaking of guns, a shooter lives or dies by the weapons it provides to the gamer. They must be varied, feel meaty, and rip enemies to shreds with just a couple of rounds. The average FPS arsenal usually runs the gamut of pistols, assault rifles, shotguns, submachine guns, rocket launchers, grenades, and the like. However, F.E.A.R. is anything but an average shooter, and as such, its weapon roster goes beyond what most shooters offer to the player. F.E.A.R.'s weaponry does include some of the aforementioned staples, although it ramps their stopping power up to 11. The shotgun in particular is brutal. Just one shot at close range can send an enemy flying into the air like a ragdoll, or, if unlucky, vaporize him into a cloud of red mist. The penetrator can pin opponents to the wall with its rods and is incredibly sonorous when used in conjunction with bullet time. The grenades are even more magnificent to behold, especially when one slows down gameplay and and watches the shock waves rip through the flesh of the point man's hapless foes. F.E.A.R's weapons are absolutely exceptional to use and strike an incredible balance between quantity and quality. Plentiful enough to satisfy the needs of any discerning gamer, and powerful enough to keep the players using them. Of course, a game has to challenge as well in order to provide the meaty satisfaction that comes with eviscerating the opposition. Without challenge, the entire experience would feel like a predictable pushover bereft of tension or excitement. In a shooter, that challenge mainly comes from the hostile NPCs that populate the levels and their governing AI. And AI is something that F.E.A.R excels at. The replicas aren't going to stand around waiting to get one between the eyes. They're going to flank the avatar, knock objects down to create cover, flush the point man out with grenades, provide suppressive fire for their teammates, communicate with one another, and generally make the gamer's life a living hell. Part of that achievement stems from the way the replicas operate during combat. Unlike the enemy waves seen in countless other shooters, F.E.A.R prefers to dish out punishment in smaller quantities in the form of coordinated squads. This allows the clone soldiers to plan out their strategies and tactics and work as a team rather than a loose coalition of allies. Their strength mainly comes from their calculating demeanor, not their numbers. It's that level of intelligence that allows F.E.A.R's gunfights to be thrilling and heart-pounding. One never quite knows what the replicas are up to, since they won't hesitate to switch strategies on the fly, and they will be more than willing to pin the point man down if players don't react quickly enough, providing dynamism and balance to the overall gameplay. In fact, too many FPSs can make one of two common design mistakes where combat is concerned. Either they force the avatar to remain in a specific spot, or they overwhelm them with lots of enemies to make the game more artificially challenging. These are traits that are shared by a lot of cover shooters and old-school ROMs. It's all too easy to bore or exhaust the participant when all they want to do is have fun killing their virtual foes and enter a state of flow, in which the gamer is fully immersed in a feeling of energized focus, full involvement, and enjoyment in the process of the activity. F.E.A.R avoids that mistake by doing one simple thing: making the player feel outnumbered, but not outgunned. This is important because the gamer must feel like they need to overcome incredible but not impossible odds, and they have to do so by fully taking advantage of the equipment and abilities they have at their disposal. Both the point man and replicas have tricks up their sleeves, which helps level the playing field for both sides and keeps things engaging and balanced. It also makes the game challenging, not punishing. Both sides can end a gunfight in a matter of seconds if one outsmarts the other. The player may throw a grenade at an enemy squad and end a firefight before it even started. Or the replicas can kill the point man by detonating an explosive barrel near him, reinforcing the fact that the slightest miscalculation on either side can change the outcome of a gun battle in an instant. It's this balance that allows F.E.A.R to maintain the state of flow that can immerse the participant into the experience and optimally plan their attacks without fully knowing how everything will play out. As a result, F.E.A.R is not just highly replayable, it's effortlessly replayable. It relies almost entirely on its dynamic and adaptive core mechanics and systems to keep gamers entertained, with no two gunfights or play sessions ever being the same. When everything is taken into consideration, one starts to realize how F.E.A.R was designed around experimentation. Players will want to try out new strategies, experiment with weapons that they initially didn't pay attention to, and see how differently things will turn out. But combat alone isn't the only merit that has made F.E.A.R such a masterful work over the years, nor is it the game's only source of hair-raising tension. True to its name, F.E.A.R also seeks to unease gamers through its ambiance.
He deserved to die. They all deserve to die.
A goal of the F.E.A.R production team was to disturb players' imaginations, instilling the psychology of the paranormal encounter in the participant in order to get under their skin, similar to what J-horror classics such as Ring and Pulse have achieved. Craig Hubbard, F.E.A.R's lead designer and writer, describes the effect he hoped to achieve as a subtle and cerebral type of dread, emphasizing suspense and the shadows. This is in stark contrast to typical Western games like Doom 3, which spoon-fed horror to the player. In F.E.A.R, it's not so much about what lies ahead as it is about what should lie ahead but doesn't. This adds an element of unpredictability, toying with expectations to produce the aura of ambiguous terror characteristic of J-horror. F.E.A.R's approach to dread also influenced the title's sound design. To heighten the feeling of uncertainty and tension, audio engineers Nathan Grigg and James Ackley adopted a minimalist and unorthodox approach to ambient sound effects and how they were triggered. They used cheap equipment to record sounds that aren't scary on their own, but become so in the eerie context of the game. In addition, they structured music around individual scenes as to ratchet up the tension and keep players from recognizing the formula and not being scared anymore. This approach fosters an oppressive atmosphere that can crescendo at any moment, made all the more potent by being framed far more often than not by Ma. Ma, or substantial silence, is an important tool of J-horror employed by F.E.A.R to instill dread. In the game's most isolated environments, such as the water treatment facility, the avatar's footsteps are the only sounds that can be heard. While the point man is trudging through the dank locale, pockets of noise from knocked soda cans and scurrying rats begin to break the silence, building suspense. And foreign radio chatter suddenly alerts the avatar to incoming danger.
We got contact!
In other words, the tension builds gradually rather than suddenly, and hardly lets up, allowing the palpable atmosphere to consistently torment and immerse the gamer. Fearsome visuals also play a key role in F.E.A.R. Much of the game's paranormal chaos appears in the form of a ghostly little girl. Alma Wade, whose given name means soul in Spanish and Portuguese and is derived from Alma Mobley in Peter Straub's novel Ghost Story, haunts the player at various points throughout their adventure. Aside from her red dress that contrasts with white ones that signify ritual purity in Shinto, Alma closely resembles Yuri, or ghostly specters like Yoko from Seance and Mitsuko Kawai from Dark Water. According to Hubbard, Alma is thematically inspired by Sadako from Ring, who was raped by a smallpox-infected doctor and then murdered, becoming a viral ghost who spreads disease to her victims. Hubbard admits that creepy little girls have been freaking him out since The Shining, and that Alma was born out of a tradition of eerie, faceless female ghosts, and not as an answer to any specific movie character. For F.E.A.R, Hubbard adapted the disease concept from Ring into the plot twist of Alma being a literal and figurative toxic secret buried underground, seeping out and poisoning the game environment. This idea of a tragic secret that refuses to stay buried was inspired by two of Hubbard's real-life experiences. The first was the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, a nuclear storage facility near his childhood home in southern New Mexico, which haunted Hubbard's imagination due to concerns about radioactive material leaking from the site and polluting the groundwater. The second was the smog monster Hedorah from the 1971 film Godzilla vs. Hedorah, which impressed the young Hubbard with its ability to spread pollution and reduce the landscape to an uninhabitable wasteland. In a similar way, Alma's corrosive rage intensifies the effects of the chemicals that leak out of the underground facility in F.E.A.R, leading to the abandonment of the district which the player visits in the game. Alma's backstory and psychic powers are also inspired by J-horror ghosts. As a child, Alma was gifted with psychic powers, but suffered from nightmares that were made worse by the negative emotions of the people around her. Because of her powers, Alma began to be experimented on by the Armacam Technology Corporation, the game's antagonist, which tried to unlock her abilities through painful electroshock therapy and isolation, an analogy to the ostracizing of Japanese women who did not conform to social mores. Her forced recruitment into parapsychological experiments is reminiscent of the suffering that the titular character in the classic anime feature Akira had to endure. Hubbard confirms that Akira was a huge influence on Alma Wade. Throughout the game, Alma makes use of her psychic powers to trigger supernatural phenomena. Some of her powers, such as the ability to project horrifying visions into a person's mind and transport people to an alternate dimension, are reminiscent of the Nensha, or projected thermography, that Sadako used in Ring to burn disturbing images into a cursed videotape. Telepathic scenes of bloody hallways and blank spaces engulfed in flames blur the line between the real and the imaginary. All of these factors make Alma an omnipresent menace. Sometimes the player dies if they get too close. In other encounters, she vanishes in a blink of an eye, leaving uncertainty as to whether or not she constitutes a real threat. Is Alma physically real, or does she simply exist as a frightening but harmless apparition in the minds of those who see her? The game doesn't give a clear answer, but encourages the gamer to piece out Alma's true and mysterious nature by exploring claustrophobic levels and collecting information from phone messages and computer terminals. But even without visual evidence of Alma's presence, indistinct whispers and a soft giggle give players the sensation that they are being stalked, made all the more terrifying when juxtaposed with the eerie silence that pervades the title's atmosphere.
They left her in darkness. They left her to die.
Perhaps the most important lesson one can draw from F.E.A.R. is that crafting an experience that enhances both halves of the core shooter formula not only requires a cohesive and lean vision that is bereft of feature fat and conducive to a harmonious title, but also encourages developers by looking beyond their medium and cultural boundaries with regards to design inspirations. It is that willingness to think outside the proverbial box and leverage the technological advances of the time that has enabled Monolith to create a game that bears gameplay and presentational merits of equal excellence. As a shooter, F.E.A.R. can still surprise and entertain the player with its advanced AI, meaty weapons, eye-popping gunplay, and dynamic scenarios. And with recent titles such as Doom and Shadow Warrior having reinvigorated interest in campaign-focused FPSs that provide ample amounts of wanton destruction and carnage, Monolith's magnum opus is unlikely to lose its gameplay luster anytime soon, in spite of its age. As a horror title, F.E.A.R. embodies the mystery and sense of psychological vulnerability of classics like Cairo and Dark Water. Using suggestion rather than literal representation, the game creates a mental conflict between what participants thought they experienced and what actually unfolded. It succeeds in conveying its namesake emotion through its understanding and borrowing of the thematic elements that have made Japanese horror an international sensation. The concept of an FPS deeply influenced by Hong Kong cinema and Japanese culture thus becomes less far-fetched and more effective at advancing the shooter formula. The developers proved that a genre conventionally based on Western philosophy and design goals can be fused with elements from Eastern societies in a way that does not compromise the gameplay mechanics, but rather enhances them, providing a refreshing and enjoyable virtual experience that honors its gaming genre roots and cultural influences. As Craig Hubbard once said, creativity is recombinant, and the more inspiration designers take in, the more they have to draw from, and the higher the chances they'll produce something with a distinct perspective. And it's that kind of perspective that has made F.E.A.R. what it truly is, timeless.
What was that sound?